Hey, what's up, guys? Welcome back. Stevie C with WINEWORKZ. I'm reading from book 2, Please Don't Die Dad, from the Please Don't Die saga, 4 books. Anyway, thanks for joining me with this, and if you've been keeping track of this journey, I really appreciate it. I do appreciate your support. This stuff's all from the heart. This is a tough one, man. I'm going to do my best to keep it together. I brought the crying towels just in case, man. You never know. I'm only human. So, and my dad and I, we were locked tight, man. So this one it hits home, But anyway, this is Chapter 9 from Please Don't Die Dad. Chapter 9. I have 6 months to live. Living in Hawaii was amazing. I was truly blessed. I had my dream job as a waiter at the Ritz-Carlton Maunalani Hotel on the Big Island of Hawaii. I lived in a luxurious condo that was located on a beautiful golf course with my best friend from college named Toby. Toby was a manager at the same hotel and was doing very well for himself. Money was never an issue for either of us. Whatever we wanted, we could have. Life was good. Toby had a sweet car and a beautiful blonde girlfriend that lived with us. My girlfriend, Dawn, who was living still back in Miami, was soon to be moving to Hawaii to live with us as well. Every moment I woke up, and each and every morning, I was grateful. One morning, as I was drinking an extra strong cup of Kona espresso roast that I had just made for myself from our French press, I saw in the classified ads as I was reading a bicycle for sale. It was located about 30 miles from our location, and Toby had agreed to take me there so I could buy it. I was so excited. Life was good, but it was about to get even better, or so I thought. The very same day that I got my new bicycle back home, I decided to take a little ride around the block. We lived in Waikoloa Village on the Kona side of the Big Island of Hawaii, and a bicycle ride around the block in this neighborhood equaled about a 40-mile trip. The ride was so incredible. The uphill parts of my journey were absolutely brutal, but I was equally rewarded with intense downhill sections that would bring on great speeds that fueled my ever-so-pumping adrenaline. I was so excited after a 10 or so mile uphill battle, where several times I was so exhausted that I had to get off the bike and walk it, but I was so excited to see a sign that said, "Downhill, next 13 miles." I pedaled eagerly towards the sign, and with a few quick pedal strokes of my tired legs, I quickly found myself speeding down the hill at death-defying speeds. Surrounded by razor-sharp and unforgiving lava rock on both sides of the narrow road, I had to be extremely careful. One wrong move and a crash would be catastrophic. It was especially dangerous when cars would pass me. One dickhead driver passed me so closely that I actually felt his passenger side mirror lightly touch my handlebars, almost wiping me out. The most wonderful and joyous moments happened to me when I zipped around this one particular bend. It was a super clear and perfect day. As I looked before me, I could clearly see the island of Maui off in the distance as I sped down the never-ending road. I had never felt so much happiness in my entire life. All I kept thinking about at the time was how excited I was to call my mom and dad and tell them about my new bicycle and my super cool bike ride as soon as I arrived back home. I was so proud of myself. I had felt so incredibly accomplished, and I just couldn't wait to tell mom and dad. Dripping with sweat and so tan that I looked like a completely different person, I walked into the condo to see my roommate Toby sitting on the couch eating a beef fajita from the beef fajita kit we would always buy from the local grocery store. And he was also stuffing jalapeno poppers into his mouth like he was eating candy. It always made me laugh to see Toby eating jalapeno poppers because it reminded me of the time he came home drunk one night and he went right to the oven where I had some cooking. The directions clearly said, wait 5 to 6 minutes to let cool before eating. But Toby wasn't thinking straight, and he put one into his mouth directly from the oven as soon as he heard the timer go off. When he bit down on the thing, the scalding hot cream cheese came pouring out down his mouth and chin and gave him serious burns. Although he was in obvious pain and I felt super bad for him, it was literally impossible not to laugh. As he was now sitting on the couch, Toby had just taken a huge rip off of the 3-foot homemade bong that I had shipped to Hawaii from Miami, and he offered me a hit. I declined and told him I was going to call my parents first. I'm so glad you just said that because I would have probably forgotten to tell you, but your dad called about an hour ago and he told me to tell you to call him as soon as you got back. It sounded kind of important, Toby said with a full mouth. I had a phone in my bedroom and excused myself and went in there to make the call. Dad answered after only 2 rings, and it was so good to hear his voice. Little did I know that this phone call was the phone call that would change my life forever. I never really did get the chance to tell Dad about my recent adventure, as his news were much more important. How are you, son? How is work at the Ritz-Carlton? Dad questioned. Everything is great here, Dad. I feel like I could live here forever, I responded. There seemed to be an awkward silence for a moment as I heard my dad take a deeper than usual breath. Toby said you had to tell me something, and he mentioned that it sounded rather important, I continued. Is everything okay at home, Dad? Oh, yes, all is well here. Your mom is keeping busy with work, and we both miss you so much. I've been starting your car twice a week so the battery doesn't die. The dogs are doing well, and they miss you as well, and the doctor says I have 6 months to live. Dad kept speaking. Both David and Elisa are doing well in college, and they are both getting good grades. They send their love, Dad finished. What did you just say? I said with a lump in my throat. I said that Elisa and David are doing well in school, and they both send their love. No, Dad. Before that, I questioned. Oh, that. He said, followed by yet another deep breath and another pause. Stephen, I am sorry to have to tell you this over the phone, but I've been diagnosed with mesothelioma lung cancer, and the doctor just told me that I have about 6 months to live. And just like that, in the blink of an eye, in just one phone call, my life was forever changed. The first thing in the morning, I went to the Ritz-Carlton to put in my 2 weeks' notice and explain to them that there was a family emergency and that I was moving back home to Buffalo immediately. They were very gracious and understanding and had even agreed to let me finish out the week and still leave the hotel under good terms without staying on for the second week. I started packing and shipping. I safely packed my guitar and my amp and shipped them home. Those 2 items were the most important thing to me. I ended up leaving a lot of stuff behind to save money. My beloved 3-foot bong was one of those items. I felt bad leaving Toby with the full weight of the rent on our condominium all to himself, but I knew that he understood that I had to go home to be with my family. While packing boxes to be shipped home, I reminisced about an episode of the Brady Bunch that I remembered from my childhood, where one of the kids was warned not to bring any indigenous items back home to the mainland because they were considered to be bad luck. I believed it was a tiki doll or something like that one of them had brought back from Hawaii and gave the entire family tremendously bad luck. This scene from the show played out in my mind as I packed my boxes for home carefully, but reluctantly leaving behind anything that was actually from Hawaii. And this included some super cool lava rocks that I had kept as souvenirs from my visit to Volcano National Park. One thing I was unwilling to part with was this really neat old and vintage Hawaii license plate that had the numbers 420 on it. I had found it on one of my many long and arduous bicycle journeys. I had stopped the bicycle and on a secluded stretch of road to take a pee, and that's when I noticed it hidden in the brush. It was actually still connected to part of a torn-off bumper that was obviously involved in some kind of accident many, many years before. It took me over 10 minutes in the hot sun to remove the bolts from the plate to get it free because there was so much rust. I had placed the license plate in a box with a bunch of other cool trinkets and treasures and knickknacks to ship home. Interestingly enough, every single package that I had shipped back home to Buffalo arrived undamaged and problem-free, except for the box with the vintage 420 Hawaiian license plate. It mysteriously was lost in the mail and had never arrived at all. It was the longest group hug ever. Seeing Mom and Dad again for the first time in so long brought tears to my eyes and theirs. They picked me up at the airport in Buffalo and we went to a nice lunch together to catch up. Cancer was never discussed. It was my father's decision to utilize the services of the hospice organization so that he could die peacefully when the time came in his own home, and that is exactly what happened. No matter how prepared for something inevitable like this, no matter how much advance warning that you have, as was the case with our situation, when the moment finally does come, it is still just incredibly hard to say goodbye, and to say goodbye forever. My heart goes out to those who have lost loved ones suddenly with no warning, perhaps from a car accident, natural disaster, or even worse, suicide. We were given plenty of warning that my father was going to die. We just wanted him to be at peace with no more pain. And there was a lot of pain, not just for him, but for all of us, watching his rapid decline. Looking at my dad that day as we had lunch, I thought to myself that he actually looked pretty good, albeit perhaps a bit tired, maybe. Other than that, Dad looked pretty good, but as the cancer was slowly taking over his body, all that was slowly about to change. I could tell that Dad was at peace with his situation. He was very brave and dealt with it like a man. He tried to hide the fact that he was in constant pain. As the weeks crawled by, he would sleep more and more, and he would always be a bit colder than usual and would constantly be bundled up with sweaters and blankets. It was hard to see Dad like this. When I arrived home from the airport, he was around 225 pounds and rock solid. Not only a few short weeks later, he quickly was reduced to 200 pounds, and it was visibly obviously now that he was sick. Dad had a lot of friends, and many of them wanted to come out to the house to visit Dad, but Dad wouldn't accept any visitors. This was hard for most people to understand because they knew, as we did, that he was dying, and they just wanted to say goodbye and pay their last respects. Dad stood firm. He had made it abundantly clear that he wanted his memory preserved. He wanted very much for his friends and relatives to remember the healthy Thomas Cammarata that they all knew and loved, not the sad sack of bones withering away as he now was, waiting to die. It was a hard thing to understand, but anyone and everyone who knew my dad understood and respected his final wishes. Mom and Dad's bedroom was always upstairs with the other bedrooms, but as Dad's health declined, it became harder and harder for him to climb the stairs. Fortunately, many years earlier, Dad had transformed part of the garage into a spare bedroom for my brother David. David and I had shared a bedroom together not only at this house, but at our first house on Outwater Drive as well. As we grew older, we would fight more, mostly territorial battles on whose side of the room was whose and whatnot. Dad finally agreed to let David have his own bedroom. After David left the house and moved away to go to college, we used the bedroom simply as a spare bedroom for when out-of-town guests would come to visit. It was this very room where Dad would now lay, and where ultimately he would take his last and final breath. Dad was being treated for his cancer at Roswell Park Cancer Center in Buffalo, New York. The visits to Roswell were very demanding on everyone, me included. We had to drive there very slowly because any little bump would cause Dad pain and discomfort. As the weeks went on, we would have to utilize a wheelchair to get him from the car to his appointments. He had several surgeries in the beginning to open him up to see if there was anything that could be done to save his life. They tried new cutting-edge treatments on him as well as the familiar chemotherapy treatments that he had undergone 25 years earlier. When I was a small boy, Dad was diagnosed with Hodgkin's disease and went through chemotherapy and radiation, and he had lost all of his hair and his beard. We thought we were going to lose him back then, but through much prayer and through God's blessings, his cancer went into remission. The cancer that he found himself battling now was mesothelioma lung cancer. It became pretty clear, pretty fast, that Dad's cancer was here to stay, and it was taking over his body at an uncontrollable rate. He was getting so skinny and beginning to look so old. It was a very difficult time for our family, as I'm sure you could well imagine. Dad had gone from 225 pounds to now only around 150 pounds. The lung cancer had now spread to his stomach, and he couldn't even eat solid foods anymore. He was on very strong pain meds to help him stay comfortable, and this was the beginning of the end. One day, Dad asked me if I could drive him to the cottage so he could take one last and final look before he died. At this point, he was so weak and sick that Mom didn't want him to leave the house. He had even stopped all treatments at Roswell Park because there was simply nothing more that they could do for him. We had to wait for a day that Mom wasn't around so we wouldn't get into any trouble. Dad wanted to take his truck and have me drive it, but the truck was so high off the ground I thought it best to take my little Mazda 626 that I had at the time. My car was a standard, and Dad was so physically sensitive that I could see him wince in pain every time I shifted through the gears. Any little pothole or bump in the road had to be carefully avoided as to not provide any further discomfort for my dad. We finally made it. The construction on my sister Elisa's house had begun, and I could see a tear in my dad's eyes form as he noted the progress and visualized the approaching future in his mind's eye that he would not be a part of. It was very emotional. The ride there and back was mostly accomplished in silence. I wanted to talk with my dad the entire time, but it was just too much effort physically for him to talk and hold a conversation, and I understood that. On the way home, Dad spoke suddenly. "Stephen, pull over. I need you to give me more of my morphine drops." "Dad, I just gave them to you an hour ago, and you are not due until after we get home." "Stephen, I am dying and I am in pain. Don't argue with me. Pull over now and give me 2 more drops," he barked. I could now see that perhaps my dad was getting addicted to this medicine. At this point in my life, I had never tried morphine, but seeing as though how much my dad liked it, it got my wheels turning in my brain. Maybe I should try a drop of the stuff. I could maybe just try 1 drop to check it out. This decision, little did I know, would be a huge mistake and have an incredibly negative impact on my life and others in my circle. Back then in 1995, doctors were much less cautious and restrictive when it came to writing out prescriptions for hardcore narcotics such as morphine. I would never jeopardize my dad's need for his medicine just to satisfy my want for it, and I would always put his needs before mine. Luckily, Dad had a ton of the stuff. In the refrigerator in the basement, he had a supply that would last him several months. I didn't realize it at the time, but weeks after my father's death, I would soon find out that his doctor had even scripted him several boxes of morphine anal suppositories that were now in the freezer in preparation for the fact that eventually my father's stomach would no longer be able to take the liquid drops because of his cancer. The dosage for Dad's morphine was only 2 drops under the tongue. Sometimes he would request 4. Dad was not only getting addicted to the stuff, I was as well. It brings me great pain to admit this and to write about it now, because I realize that some of my readers know me personally and could even be family members reading this, or even my 2 boys reading this now. I am not proud of this time in my life. I had battled with drug addiction since my teenage years, and now at 25 years old, I thought I had a pretty good handle on things. I was doing very well until the morphine entered the picture. I loved this stuff, and it loved me. It loved me as well. I had even introduced my good friend Jason to the stuff. Another big mistake, as he liked the stuff even more than I did. I will introduce you to Jason in a later chapter. Jason would come over to the house on the pretense of helping me take care of my dad, but I knew that it was just to get his fix of Dad's morphine. I knew Jason was a drug addict just like myself, so I really only had myself to blame for introducing him to the stuff. Jason would come over and we would play Rummy 500 for hours and hours while we kept an eye on Dad. I was never a big card player, but I loved playing that game. We really liked to go bowling as well, and when Mom came home to relieve me, we would go down the street to South Transit Lanes. Oftentimes we were so fucked up on the morphine that we would take turns slapping each other in the face just to stay awake. Driving a car or even attempting to just even be out in public, in a public setting while high on this drug was just not a good idea, but we did it anyway. I am amazed at the fact that I survived this particular low point in my life. As you will find out in a later chapter in this book, sadly, my good friend Jason did not. As Dad withered away, so did his morphine stash. Morphine looked a lot like green creme de menthe. So as the vials were depleted, we would fill them with the green creme de menthe that my mom had in the liquor cabinet, and we would put it back into the refrigerator so my mom would never notice. I had to be very careful to keep the placebo vials strategically placed where they would not be used and mistaken for the real stuff. My dad needed this medicine to keep him comfortable, and I couldn't live with myself if my addiction was the cause of any more pain for him that he was already going through by me or my mom mistakenly giving him a dose of creme de menthe instead of the real medicine. I am confident that this never happened, and I made sure of it. Dad was now down to less than 150 pounds, and he looked terrible. Besides immediate family, there was only one person my dad wanted to see, and that was the priest from our church. I figured the priest's frequent visits to the house before my father passed were just to get my dad's spiritual side in order, and to perhaps receive his last rites or have confession or whatever my dad needed. As it turns out, and I didn't even realize this until the day of my father's funeral, the reason the priest was there, in addition to the reasons I've already mentioned, was to give him Holy Communion. In addition to that, was to help him write his own eulogy. Dad was dictating to the priest exactly what he wanted read aloud at his funeral. It was to be printed and handed out to each mourner as they entered the church that day of my father's funeral. And that's the end of chapter 9. Chapter 10 is called The End, which just kind of continues a little bit. Thank you so much for being a part of this book.